All right, we're back. I was reluctant to jump into politics or current events due to various reasons, like fighting with people online, friends, family, etc. But this one's keeps replaying in my head, so I really wanted to talk about the article I wrote called "Are Humans Trapped in a Dog Eat Dog World?" Recent developments of the U.S. capturing or kidnapping Venezuela's former leader Nicolas Maduro and subsequent seizure of 30 to 50 million barrels of oil forces me to reflect on the book Confessions of an Economic Hitman and interviews with author John Perkins. In it, Perkins details his time working for an engineering consulting firm in Boston linked to the NSA, where he would attempt to convince leaders of underdeveloped countries, primarily in Latin America, to accept large government loans for construction projects led by large U.S. multinational corporations like Halliburton. If you recall, Halliburton was one of the main benefactors of the Iraq War. I believe Dick Cheney had ties to the company or sat on the board at one point. So these companies essentially are nation builders. They can create railroad systems, electrical systems, um, revamp a country that's been either demolished from war or internal violence, and in a sense spread modern industrial culture throughout the world. If all went well, the U.S. firms gained a foothold in the region, established legitimate businesses, built railway and electrical systems, and established trade networks while providing jobs to the locals, whether they asked for them or not. So it's important there to think about, are these jobs a net benefit, or would the locals be better off without any intervention at all? That's a difficult topic, I think, to come to a consensus on. But one could imagine people who struggling to get food, water, power in certain areas, and would welcome having that infrastructure in place. However, there's also the flip side of, if you're a group who's been living a certain way for a long period of time, whether that's indigenous or within modern culture, and not quite accepting of foreign invasion or people telling you how to live and forcing their way of life upon you. That's a hot topic. If a country could not repay its loans, or worse, if their leader refused the arrangement outright for one reason or another, a desire to maintain local customs, keep profits in house, control their own natural resources, etc., then the American interest would proceed to escalate, first with sanctions, such as what we see Donald Trump doing now, for any nation that goes against his worldview. The first step is sanctions. After that comes threats of violence before sending in the jackals, as John Perkins calls them, or Marines to intimidate the leader. If all else fails, they would send in the military to remove the defiant leader, and install one more aligned with the interests of the U.S. corporatocracy. This sounds very similar to what happened in Venezuela, but this pattern of empire expansion has repeated throughout the late 1900s in places like Ecuador, Chile, Honduras, Panama, Nicaragua, and of course Iraq, whether it's the Gulf War in the 90s or modern day after 9/11. Weapons of mass destruction, seems like the consensus there was they most likely didn't exist, but we'll save that for another time. And these often involve large multinational food and agriculture and oil companies such as Dole and Shell. So essentially, the thought or conspiracy, however you look at it, is that these companies are working with the U.S. military to install favorable conditions for them to have a stronghold in the area. In the U.S., this has historically been sold to the public as spreading democracy, fostering economic growth, or promoting global free trade agreements. Now, it seems it is no longer necessary to really sell it. We just have to say we need the oil. There are drug lords in Venezuela who stole the oil from us decades ago, and we're taking it back. Now, it's hard for me to imagine how one could steal something from someone when it was already on their soil to begin with. Seems a little convoluted. A more cynical thinker would classify this as straight up theft and colonialism via the military industrial complex. However we frame it, I want to address a few fundamental questions that arise from U.S. dominance on a global scale. One, is it true that someone or group must rule the world? If so, is it better that the U.S. do it or that someone else does it? And three, how does this impact the average citizen? Strength and honor. What is the proper balance between going out and taking what you want in this world and being content with what you already have? Some argue that this degree of empire building is relatively new on human scales, as we spent the first 100,000 years or so of existence living in small subsistence hunter gatherer tribes of no more than 50 close relatives. The agricultural revolution provided humans with the ability to settle in one area, feed many more people, and grow their populations well beyond 50 for the first time. This likely made it much more difficult to share resources with non family members, leading to conflict over land, food, and even lovers. Who then stepped in to restore order or at least provide brief periods of peace during to these fledgling empires? My guess is probably the males in the group who are most capable of violence, mixed with the most politically savvy, as well as the persuasive females. While human behavior is incredibly diverse and involves all sorts of soft skills like influence, manipulation, negotiation, lies, deceit, and cooperation, I have a hard time believing that at the end of the day, nothing trumps violence or the threat of as the most powerful enforcer of conduct. One can argue that any crazed tyrant can be overthrown by a cooperative group dating back to our early hominid days. But that also requires violence, even if the motives are more justified, and so the cycle continues. The example there is, groups of early Homo sapiens or even primate ancestors. If one alpha male dominates the whole group and is a complete ass and just beats people and takes everyone's resources and hoards women, eventually the others in the group would cooperate to remove him, but that the way to remove that person is also group violence. So it's hard to imagine a way out of that cycle, but let's keep diving into it. We may feel free today as we drive our cars, playing our favorite music to jobs that we may or may not enjoy, and later shop for groceries. But let's do a quick thought experiment to reduce the complexity of our modern lives down a bit. What would happen if we refused to earn money and had nobody to take care of us? Eventually, we would be unable to pay our car loan or mortgage or rent. After a few phone calls and threatening letters, a repo man or repo human, although I have not seen much gender diversity in that profession, would take our cars away, and armed police would show up to forcibly remove us from a bank foreclosed home or an apartment where we failed to pay rent for some long period of time. Some small percentage of citizens may attempt to resist, but most would succumb to giving up their possessions or spending time in jail. The same goes for unpaid taxes, child support, and traffic tickets. Force is the base of law enforcement. We can debate the validity of laws another time, but suffice it to say they arose for a reason, whether to preserve power or punish abhorrent antisocial behavior. So this is a debate between, rule of law, what's needed, what's not. If you view human society as mob rule, emotional, angry humans will eventually revolt, and therefore you need a strong police force or some group to protect one's private property and assets. That leans more in favor towards capitalism and protection of, I would argue, elite groups of wealth hoarders. At the same time, if you argue that all violence is bad or all cops are bad, would that create a world of peace, prosperity, and kumbaya? I don't think so either. I usually fall in the middle on a lot of these things, and this is one that I've been grappling with a lot lately. So, how does the use of force play out on the global chessboard? If a group of people willing and able to commit violence want something, for example, land, natural resources, and proceed to forcibly take it, who can prevent them from doing so other than an equally powerful group? Some say this concept of mutually assured destruction has led to a more peaceful world post World War II, as nuclear deterrence increased and global superpowers agreed to use the US petrodollar as the main source of trade currency. A country who relies on the imports of another is less likely to annihilate them. In the case of Venezuela, it appears to me that they are either not strong enough on their own or strategically important enough for any of their allies to defend them from a hostile US takeover and risk a wider conflict. As one of the few remaining countries in the region to not have a favorable trade agreement with the United States, their invasion was likely only a matter of time if we accept endless empire expansion and greed, or national security if you prefer that stance, as the default human nature for those atop the dominance hierarchy. Did Maduro commit atrocities on his own people and show signs of being a dictator while wearing this very same Nike Tech tracksuit that I have on right now? And I will say that I had this before it became an internet meme. So this is not in support of Maduro in any way, but it is ironic that I have it and now I'm wearing it for this podcast. I don't claim to be an expert on Venezuela, but it certainly seems plausible. At the same time, did ICE agents shoot a U.S. citizen in cold blood just a few weeks ago while posing minimal risk to them on behalf of a burgeoning dictator? Also seems pretty plausible. I won't get in too much into the ICE debate right now, especially with the Minnesota shooting, because that's a whole article in and of itself. Um, in short, was she breaking the law? I suppose because she was blocking traffic. Did it require murder? No, absolutely not. Um, yeah, let's move on from that one. So, who are we to police the world? It appears to me that the question is pointless insofar as the police are willing and able to use overwhelming violence against those who are not. Short way of saying is it doesn't matter who should police the world if those who are most willing to use violence end up being the ones who rule the world. So it's a very difficult way of viewing reality, but I'm having a hard time getting away from it at this moment. I have to acknowledge that we do benefit from US dominance on a global scale by way of cheap, easy access to energy, running water, sewer systems, endless forms of entertainment, protection from foreign invasion, etc. But our own foreign invasions come with consequences such as increased migration from war-torn countries, increased threats of terrorism, and civil unrest. Whether the net outcome is positive or negative is highly complex and depends on the outlook of the individual. I can point to extreme wealth inequality, rising cost of living, stagnant wages, climate change, obesity rates, suicide rates, and pharmaceutical drug abuse as signs of societal decline. But inevitably, a tech billionaire or a far right free market capitalist will remind me that life has never been safer. There are more millionaires now than ever before. Infant mortality rate is much better than the past. Grocery stores shelves are stocked, showers are hot, TVs are cheap, and AI will soon provide abundance for everyone, freeing us from the burden of having to work, which I'm not sure I believe in that just yet, but it is a claim out there. Yet another example of the messy gray middle ground being more indicative of reality than the polls. Perhaps Thomas Sowell was right, and I don't claim to be a strong advocate of Sowell overall, but there is one quote that sticks with me, and it is, "There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs." I think the important aspect there is to consider that whenever we attempt to solve complex problems, we often create even more problems that need to be solved again in an infinite loop. So we could be burdened to just be endless problem solvers, forever dissatisfied and lacking contentment. So, are we humans stuck in a dog eat dog world? For those of us adverse to using violence, manipulation, or extreme charisma to acquire more material wealth, are the likes of Jesus, Gandhi, and Martin Luther King Jr. enough to bring an end to human psychopathy? Unfortunately, I think the answer is no. Despite our best efforts at achieving a sort of global morality, the world's power brokers march on while we watch in disdain from our smartphones. I do believe that the long arc of morality bends towards justice, but it is a very long arc with many peaks and troughs. Perhaps the best we can do is make our tiny little personal worlds sanctuaries from the horrors of reality. We can choose to ignore the chaos to the best of our abilities, even as some remind us that silence can also be considered violence in the face of atrocities. So long as life is reasonably comfortable for most, we can reluctantly accept the actions of power brokers on top of our hierarchies, or at least distract ourselves when things get too heavy. We can start families, raise children, watch football, live in the present moment. But invariably, we will be forced to think about what sort of world they will inherit as adults. That is, if we are prone to thinking about such things at all. How long will that widespread comfort last before hitting a critical threshold? I'm not sure anyone has a good answer. Thank you for listening.